Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is our deep dive into the theological realities that really shape our lives. And I want you to imagine something for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, imagine you are working this absolutely grueling 12-hour shift on a construction site.
Oh, man.
Right. The sun is blistering, your back is aching. I mean, your hands are just covered in blisters. You've been out there hauling bricks since like 6 o'clock in the morning.
Sounds miserable.
It is.
Mm.
And you are just watching the clock tick down all day long. Then, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right as you're packing up your tools, this guy wanders onto the site.
Just casually strolls in.
Yeah, strolls in. He sweeps up a little dust for maybe, 15 minutes. Then the foreman calls everyone over to hand out the day's pay in cash.
There we go.
He hands the new guy $300. And you're standing there thinking, wow, if a guy who worked 15 minutes gets $300, I am about to get thousands.
Yeah, naturally. That's just basic math.
Right. Then the foreman hands you your envelope. You open it up. $300.
Oh, you would be furious.
Absolutely furious. You'd be, taking that foreman to the labor board. You'd be screaming about injustice.
Yeah, because we all have this psychological ledger, right?
Yes. Human beings are totally hardwired with that ledger.
Yeah.
We track what we owe, what we are owed, and how the scales of fairness balance out.
We can't help it.
We really can't. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to look at a biblical text that takes that human obsession with scorekeeping and just shatters it.
Completely dismantles it.
Yeah. We are looking at Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 7. It's the parable of the laborers in the vineyard. And the goal here is to help you take that rigid ledger you carry around in your head and throw it out so we can uncover the staggering reality of God's sovereign grace.
And that idea of the psychological ledger is, it's really the perfect entry point because the world we live in operates on a very strict economic system.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, from the time we're kids, we are conditioned to understand merit. You do your chores, you get your allowance.
You study hard, you get an A on the test.
Right. It's a ledger where every single unit of currency or praise is, meticulously earned through your own sweat and the amount of time you put in. You put in the time, you get the paycheck.
Which makes complete sense to our natural minds.
It feels correct. It feels just. But the kingdom of heaven operates on an entirely different economic structure.
A completely different economy.
Yeah. Jesus introduces a scenario here that frustrates our human concepts of fairness to the absolute breaking point.
He really pushes the buttons.
He does. He introduces a master who acts with total sovereignty, a master who doesn't wait for people to earn their keep, but actively seeks out those who are producing absolutely nothing.
Which is so offensive to our pride.
It really is. This text is a direct confrontation with the idol of self-justification. It exposes the total bankruptcy of works righteousness, showing that entry into the kingdom depends exclusively on the mercy of the master, not our exertion.
So let's set the stage a bit, because this parable doesn't just, fall out of the sky.
No, context is everything here.
Right. To understand this clash between our mental ledger and the kingdom economy, we really have to look at what happens right before this in Matthew chapter 19.
The rich young ruler.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus is having this super intense conversation. This wealthy young aristocrat just walked away from Jesus because he couldn't part with his massive fortune.
He wouldn't let it go.
And Peter, who's part of that inner circle, he watches this wealthy guy walk away. And Peter looks at Jesus and essentially says, look, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have?
It's such a revealing question, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, think about it. Peter was a commercial fisherman. He left a lucrative family business.
He had actual skin in the game.
Yeah, real skin in the game. He's looking at his own sacrifice, his own duration of loyalty, and he wants to know the return on investment.
It's a highly calculating question. Peter is demonstrating a mercenary spirit.
A mercenary spirit, yeah.
Which is honestly the natural human default when dealing with religion. He's mentally tallying up his visible service, his sacrifices, the sheer amount of time he's been walking these dusty roads with Jesus.
And he expects a guaranteed payout.
Right, a proportional payout. Now, Christ doesn't deny that faithful discipleship brings a reward, but he immediately issues a striking warning right at the end of chapter 19.
First will be last.
Yeah. Jesus states that many who are first will be last, and the last first. And that specific warning is the hinge for this whole parable.
It sets up the whole thing.
It does. In fact, if you look at Matthew chapter 20, verse 1, it begins with the Greek conjunction gar.
Which translates to for or because.
Right. That single tiny word links Peter's calculating merit-based question directly to the story Jesus is about to tell.
So the parable is a direct response to Peter.
A direct polemic against that mercenary heart. Jesus is exposing the self-interest, the pride, and the toxic comparison that can infect even people who have outwardly sacrificed a lot.
You know, I think about Peter's attitude like a modern corporate employee marching into the boardroom.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. This employee has put in the overtime, skipped the family vacations, ground away at the spreadsheets for 10 years, while everyone else went home at 5.
They want their due.
Exactly.
Hey.
Well, they slide a folder across the table and demand a guaranteed promotion just for their loyalty.
Or like a mercenary soldier.
Yeah, a mercenary who refuses to step foot on the battlefield until they see the full benefits package and hazard pay in writing.
Peter wants the contract signed and notarized.
He really does. And the disciples were in massive danger here of missing the whole point of grace.
They were on the verge of measuring their worth by their seniority and their visible output.
And if they keep going down that road, the whole movement just turns into another religious corporation.
That's spot on. They were absolutely measuring their value by their visible sacrifice and how early they arrived on the scene.
Because they were the founders.
Right. They were the first ones in the door. And in any worldly system, early entrance plus a long duration of labor equals superiority.
The guy hired 20 years ago has more vacation time than the guy hired yesterday.
Sure. But Jesus is warning them that the kingdom of heaven does not calculate value based on human ledgers.
Okay, so to dismantle this mercenary mindset, Jesus tells a story. And what's fascinating is that the primary focus isn't actually on the laborers at all, is it?
No, it's not. The primary focus, the driving force of the whole narrative, is the master.
The master makes the first move.
He does. Jesus says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard.
Which is completely contrary to how we naturally think about religion and God.
Absolutely.
Let's look really closely at the mechanics of verses 1 and 2 here. The master takes the initiative. The Greek term is oikodespos.
Yeah, oikodespos, the master of the house, the absolute owner of the estate.
The absolute owner. He goes out early in the morning, around 6 a.m., to hire laborers. And here's what really stands out to me. The workers do not apply for the job.
They don't.
They aren't walking up to the estate gates dropping off resumes. They are entirely passive until the master takes action.
Just standing in the marketplace.
Yeah. The master's the one who goes out, he's the one who seeks, he hires, and he sends them into the field.
And that sequence of verbs is vital for understanding the theological framework. The narrative structure itself dismantles human pride.
How so?
Well, the kingdom isn't framed around the worthiness or the ambition or the resume of the workers. It's framed entirely around the purposeful, sovereign action of the owner.
Right. It establishes the absolute sovereignty of God in calling his people.
Yes. God is never portrayed in Scripture as a passive responder, just waiting helplessly in heaven for humanity to offer themselves on their own terms.
He is the aggressive initiator.
Precisely. The workers exist in the vineyard only because the master has a vineyard, has a purpose, and has chosen to bring them into his service.
And it's his private field, not a public park.
Right. Therefore, kingdom service is never self-defined. You can't negotiate your own terms or establish your own significance or dictate your value before the master. You're there strictly on his invitation.
That is such a crucial point.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that first group of workers and the terms they actually agree upon.
The early morning crew.
Yeah, the 6 a.m. crew. Verse 2 says the master agrees with them for a denarius a day. This is a formal legal contract.
The Greek word is symphonesis. It implies a mutual agreement or a bargain struck.
A bargain struck. Now, wait a minute. I need to push back on this for the listener who is, trying to do the math here.
Okay, push back.
A denarius is a perfectly fair, standard daily wage for an agricultural laborer in the first century Roman economy.
It is. It's enough to feed a family for a day.
Right. There's no trickery happening here. The master isn't exploiting them. It's a completely just, equitable transaction.
Very fair.
So if I'm one of those first workers, I'm happy. I know what I'm getting. Why does this standard fair contract become such a massive point of tension and resentment later in the story?
That is the core issue.
Yeah.
And the fairness of the master is central to the point Jesus is making.
Right.
The master isn't a capricious tyrant paying slave wages. He is morally upright, and the agreement is entirely just. But we have to examine the theological mechanism behind this specific contract.
Break that down for us.
In the broader scope of redemptive history and looking at the framework of the Westminster Confession, this first agreement represents the strict covenant of works.
The covenant of works.
Yes, it operates on a very simple, unbending principle. Do this and live. It is a strict legal contract.
And you do the work, you get the pay.
You perform the required labor flawlessly, and you receive the specified wage. God established this originally with Adam in the garden. Obey the command, enjoy life, disobey, and die.
And we see that reflected in the Mosaic Law too, right?
Absolutely. The law given to Israel demands perfect obedience, and if you provide it, you earn the blessing.
Which exposes our natural inclination.
It exposes that deeply ingrained desire to deal with God on a strict legal basis. We love the idea of a contract because a contract gives us a sense of control.
Right. If I punch the clock, God owes me the paycheck.
That's the mindset. The laborers agreed to the terms. They want what they have earned. And while a fair contract makes sense to our natural minds, it relies entirely on the worker's ability to actually fulfill their end of the bargain without a single flaw.
I see what you're saying. We like the vending machine version of
The
God.
vending machine, yes.
We want to put our good deeds into the slot, press the button, and receive our blessing. And if the blessing gets stuck, we shake the machine because we feel we have a legal right to that item.
We feel entitled to it.
We do. So we have this early morning group locked into a strict covenant of works. They have their contract. But the master's actions throughout the rest of the day completely upend standard labor practices.
You really do.
If human logic or standard business principles governed the vineyard, the master would go back to his house, have a cup of coffee, and wait for the sun to go down.
He has his crew. The work is getting done.
But he doesn't stop. He engages in what our sources call a relentless pursuit of the spiritually idle. Why does he keep going back out?
The persistence of the master is the beating heart of these middle verses. In verses 3 through 5, the text says the master goes out again at the 3rd hour, which is 9 a.m., then the 6th hour at noon, and the 9th hour at 3 p.m.
He keeps going back to the marketplace.
He repeatedly leaves the comfort of his estate to go down into the dirt and noise of the marketplace. And what does he find there? He finds others standing idle.
Idle. The Greek word is argus, right?
Yes, argus. Now, this is where we have to clarify the theology. A lot of modern liberal scholarship tries to soften this word.
How so?
They try to frame these men in the marketplace as eager, ambitious job seekers who just had a run of bad luck finding employment.
They want them to be the good guy.
Right. They want to read human initiative and inherent goodness into the text. They want to believe these guys were holding up signs saying, "We'll work for food."
But that's not what the text says.
No. Reformed theology recognizes this scene as a vivid, accurate picture of total depravity.
Let's unpack the mechanism of that word idle. Because in a spiritual sense, it means humanity produces absolutely nothing of eternal value.
Nothing at all.
Left in the marketplace of the world, we are spiritually inert. We're inactive. We cannot yield fruit for God's glory on our own.
We are dead in our trespasses.
It's like, I picture this like a CEO of a massive tech company suddenly leaving the boardroom in the middle of a Tuesday. He walks down to a random street corner and he hires people who never even submitted an application.
People with zero qualifications.
Yeah, people who don't have the credentials, who don't have the right clothes, and who showed zero prior interest in the company. It makes absolutely no business sense. The initiative is entirely, 100% on the CEO.
Your analogy captures the sheer, unmerited grace of the action perfectly. Because total depravity doesn't mean every human being is as purely evil as they could possibly be in their daily lives.
Right. It doesn't mean everyone is a monster.
No. It means that regarding spiritual matters, man's will is altogether passive and incapable of moving toward God until it is quickened by the Holy Spirit.
The men in the marketplace are completely disconnected from the vineyard.
They belong to the world, and they remain in that spiritually dead state until the effectual call of the Master changes their reality. God's redemptive purpose unfolds through his eternal decree, not our readiness or our resumes.
That is so humbling.
But I want to draw your attention to a massive shift in the terms the Master offers to these subsequent groups.
Okay, let's look at the terms.
He does not offer them a symphonus, a strict legal contract for a specific coin like he did with the 6 a.m. group.
Right, he doesn't mention a denarius.
He promises them whatever is right. The Greek word is dikaion, meaning just or fitting. He tells them to go into the vineyard and he will give them what is right.
That right there is a terrifying proposition for someone with a mercenary mindset.
Oh, a mercenary would hate.
A mercenary wants the exact number in writing. They want to know the hourly rate. But these workers have to completely abandon legal certainty.
They have no contract.
They have to rely entirely upon the character, the goodness, and the inherent righteousness of the master. They are given a promise, not a contract. They are stepping into the field with no leverage whatsoever.
Spot on. And this shift introduces the mechanism of the covenant of grace.
The covenant of grace.
Yes. In the covenant of grace, we cannot approach God as a creditor from whom we must extract fixed negotiated returns. We have to rest entirely in the certainty that the Lord will do what is right according to his own abundant character.
We have to trust him.
The master asks them to trust his integrity, and this safeguards the moral perfection of the master, too. Any later display of generosity cannot be viewed as unjust because his foundational premise with these workers is that he will do what is right.
It quiets that anxious heart.
It quiets the anxious heart that fears God might be unfair, and it rebukes the suspicious, legalistic heart that thinks grace somehow compromises justice.
And look at how the workers respond.
Notice their response. So they went. There is no bargaining. There is no union negotiation. Faith simply receives the word of the master, and obedience follows the command.
Wow. So they went. So if hiring uncredentialed workers at noon or 3 in the afternoon seems unusual, what happens as the sun is about to set is an absolute scandal.
It's the climax of the story.
We arrive at the climax in verses 6 and 7. It's the 11th hour. It is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The workday ends at 6.
The sun is literally going down.
The sun is going down. Human calculation screams that these workers are completely useless at this point.
Yeah.
There is zero practical value in hiring them.
They can't produce anything meaningful in an hour.
They can't produce enough grapes in 60 minutes to justify the administrative effort of bringing them into the field and adding them to the payroll. So, for you listening, think about this critically. Why does the master even bother going back out?
He bothers going back out to vividly demonstrate unconditional election.
Unconditional election.
Yes. The master's choice has absolutely nothing to do with the worker's potential output, their efficiency, their track record, or their value to his agricultural operation.
He doesn't need them.
He isn't constrained by human assumptions of timing or productivity. He goes to them and asks, "Why do you stand here idle all day?"
And their answer?
Their answer is devastating to any human notion of merit or self-worth. They say, "Because no one has hired us."
That's it.
That statement proves they bring absolutely zero leverage to the table. They can't insert themselves into the vineyard. They can't declare themselves to be agricultural workers. They are completely, helplessly dependent on the outside intervention of the householder.
They are essentially saying, we have nothing to offer and no one wants us. They are the ultimate unhirable outcasts.
The leftovers.
The leftovers.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the master looks at them and says, you go into the vineyard too.
This specific moment provides immense polemical clarity against non-reformed theological systems.
We really need to break down how this shatters those frameworks.
Let's do it. First, the 11th hour hiring completely destroys Arminian synergism.
Define synergism for us.
Synergism is the idea that salvation is a cooperative effort. It suggests that God throws down a rope, but human beings have to use their own inherent free will to grab it.
So God does his part, we do our part.
Right, it claims God reacts to human initiative. But look at the text. These men made no move. They were standing idle, doing absolutely nothing until the very end of the day.
They weren't waving their hands yelling, pick me, I'm ready to work.
Exactly. The text shows the absolute priority of grace. The sovereign summons precedes any human action. God does not react to us. We respond because he effectively called us.
That's powerful. Let's look at the other major theological framework this confronts. What does this do to the concept of earning your keep?
It explicitly refutes the Roman Catholic doctrine of condign merit.
Condign merit. How does that mechanism work?
It's a complex idea, but basically it works like this. It claims that God infuses a person with grace, and because of that infused grace, the person can perform good works that make them inherently worthy of eternal life.
So it's like a cosmic punch card.
Yes, a punch card where your good deeds eventually obligate God to hand you the reward. It claims a person can contribute a heat-of-the-day effort that puts God in their debt.
But the 11th hour workers?
They perform virtually no labor, they have no merit, they have no punch card, they have no leverage to obligate the master. The ground is completely leveled by grace.
Nobody can boast.
No one can boast. The early worker can't boast because he merely agreed to a standard legal contract. He got what he bargained for. And the late worker can't boast because he did absolutely nothing to earn his place or his wage.
Okay, so the early worker gets what was agreed upon, and the late worker gets grace. But this raises a massive theological and logical question.
Let's hear it.
I want to push on this hard, because if I am listening to this, my sense of justice is flashing red.
Understandable.
If the latecomers get the full payout, the exact same denarius as the guy who worked 12 hours, without actually doing the work, someone else had to cover the deficit.
The books have to balance.
In any real-world accounting system, the books still have to balance. You can't just hand out wages that weren't earned without bankrupting the system. And we know from the rest of Scripture that God is perfectly, inflexibly just.
He is.
He doesn't just sweep the cosmic ledger under the rug and say, don't worry about it. A debt is a debt.
Yeah.
So how can the master pay latecomers a full day's wage without violating his own perfect justice?
That is the most crucial question we can ask. And to answer it, we have to look at the Christological fulfillment of the parable.
Christological fulfillment.
Yes. Jesus isn't just giving us a detached moral illustration about ancient agrarian economics. He isn't just giving business advice.
He's revealing himself.
Jesus is the divine householder. He is the true Lord of the kingdom. He left the glory of his eternal estate to enter the dirty, chaotic marketplace of our fallen world.
And he came for a specific type of person.
He came specifically to seek the weak, the overlooked, and the unhireable. Think about who he called during his earthly ministry.
Uneducated fishermen.
He called Matthew a despised, traitorous tax collector who was viewed as human garbage by the religious elite. He ate with prostitutes and sinners. His entire redemptive mission was to seek and save the lost who had absolutely zero religious leverage.
Okay, I understand that he is the master calling the unhireable. But how does that balance the books? How does that satisfy the strict, unbending justice of God for those 11th hour workers who bring zero merit to the table? Where does the money come from to pay them?
It balances the books because Jesus Christ is not only the master, he is also the true laborer.
The true laborer.
This is the central mechanism of the doctrine of the atonement. The master can legally and justly pay the 11th hour worker a full denarius because Jesus Christ bore the scorching heat of the day in our place.
He took the heat.
He bore the infinite crushing weight of the Father's wrath on the cross. Christ perfectly fulfilled the strict agreement, the symphonesis of the covenant of works.
He lived the flawless life.
The flawless life of obedience that the law demanded from the very beginning, a life that you and I could never achieve. And because Christ earned the wage through his perfect labor and his sacrificial death, his perfect righteousness can be imputed, which means legally credited or transferred to the elect.
That is a staggering reality to wrap your mind around.
It's incredible.
The denarius given to the 11th hour worker isn't fake money. It's not unearned. It was fully, exhaustively earned by Christ.
The justice of God is completely satisfied.
The holy demands of divine righteousness aren't ignored or waved away by some kind of sentimental, grandfatherly softness. They're violently and completely met at the cross.
Grace doesn't cancel justice.
Right. Grace triumphs through justice because the Son paid the absolute maximum price. We receive the massive wage of his righteousness while bringing absolutely none of our own to the transaction.
It's like looking at your bank account, seeing a balance of zero, and then suddenly seeing a wire transfer of $1 billion from someone else's account.
That is the exact mechanism of justification by faith alone.
Yes, it is. We are justified not by our duration of sweat, not by our moral track record, and not by how early we started going to church.
We are justified solely by the infinite merit of the laborer king.
Without the substitutionary atonement of Christ, this parable would just be an account of divine whim or arbitrary favoritism. It would make God unjust.
But with the cross at the center.
With the cross at the center, it's a glorious account of divine justice, perfectly satisfied by the Son for the sake of the ungodly. The justice and generosity of God meet in perfect harmony in the person and work of Christ.
Understanding this concept of imputed righteousness completely changes how we view our own daily labor.
It changes everything.
If we contribute absolutely nothing to earn the wage, if the ledger is already perfectly balanced by Christ, how should we view our actual work in the Christian life?
That's the practical side.
Yeah, let me ask the skeptical question that always comes up when you talk about radical grace.
Go for it.
If the wage is guaranteed completely by grace and my personal effort doesn't earn it, why shouldn't I just stay in the marketplace?
Why work at all?
Exactly. Well, why shouldn't I avoid the hard, grueling work of the vineyard entirely? If I get the denarius either way, I'll just live however I want indulge my flesh, and wait until the sun goes down to cash in on Jesus' work.
That objection is as old as the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans.
Are we to continue in sin that grace may abound?
Right. It brings us to the practical application of the parable, engaging the head, the heart, and the hands.
Right.
What you are describing is the heresy of antinomianism.
Antinomianism.
The idea that because grace is free, the moral law is completely irrelevant and we can live however we want without consequence. But look closely at the text.
Okay.
The master in the parable doesn't just hand the idle men a coin while they're standing in the marketplace and tell them to go to the tavern.
He doesn't say, here's your money, go have fun.
No, he commands them, you go into the vineyard too. Grace doesn't produce sloth, it produces service.
Ah, so divine calling isn't just bare inclusion into a club.
It's a purposeful appointment to labor. God does not save his people into a state of passivity.
So we are not saved by our obedience, but we are absolutely saved unto obedience. We are brought into the vineyard to work.
Yes. In the theology of the Westminster Confession, this is brilliantly explained through the concept of the third use of the law.
The third use of the law.
The law no longer acts as a covenant of works condemning us to death for our failures, but it now acts as a perfect guide for the believer's life, showing us how to please the Father who saved us.
We need to clarify the distinction between legalism, antinomianism, and true Reformed obedience.
Okay. Legalism works out of fear, trying to earn a wage and obligate God. Antinomianism refuses to work at all, abusing grace as a license to sin.
And Reformed obedience.
Reformed obedience works entirely from grace. We do not labor in the vineyard to become the master's servants. We labor out of profound filial gratitude because he already sought us out when we were spiritually dead and idle.
We labor because we already have an unshakable standing in the household.
The psychological difference there is massive.
It is. It's the difference between an exhausted employee working out of sheer dread of being fired, constantly looking over their shoulder at the boss,
Right.
and a son working in his father's field because he loves his father, respects the family name, and knows he is already a permanent heir to the estate.
The outward action might look similar. They're both pulling weeds.
But the internal motivation is completely inverted.
The motivation is inverted, and even more crucially, the power to actually perform the labor is provided.
Empowered by union with Christ.
Yes. This obedience is empowered by our vital union with Christ. To be sent into the vineyard is not just to be given a task, it's to be joined to the living Lord, whose life supplies all spiritual fruitfulness.
Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Exactly. Jesus said that in the Gospel of John. He is the vine, we are the branches. The exact same Lord, who sovereignly calls dead sinners out of the marketplace, also sustains them in the vineyard.
And secures all their fruit for the glory of God.
This applies to every single aspect of the believer's life. Fathers and mothers leading their families, office bearers serving the church, single individuals using their time and resources. All of it is done in the vineyard without a spirit of grumbling or scorekeeping.
Because we know the eternal reward is already completely secure in Christ.
It's locked in.
You know, I want to tie this theology into how we actually worship on a Sunday morning. The sources we're looking at draw a brilliant, tangible connection between this parable of the workers and the physical act of taking the Lord's Supper.
Oh, it's such a beautiful connection.
When we gather as a church and receive the elements, it's a physical manifestation of this exact kingdom economy.
When we come to the Lord's table, the bread and the wine represent the true ultimate denarius.
The real reward.
They represent the spiritual sustenance and the grace provided entirely by the Master that we did absolutely nothing to produce.
We didn't bake the bread of life.
We didn't crush the grapes of wrath. The elements were earned entirely by Christ's broken body and shed blood on the cross.
We just received them.
We come to the communion table not as proud employees who have worked hard enough that week to deserve a seat at the banquet, but as desperate 11th hour workers hired by sheer grace.
Feeding upon the Christ, who is our only reward, it brings all of this high theology out of the abstract realm of the mind and makes it visible, tangible.
Something we can physically taste.
It completely takes the pressure off the human ledger. It moves you from being an anxious, terrified mercenary, constantly checking your spiritual bank account to see if you have enough merit to survive Judgment Day, to a grateful son or daughter resting in the completely unearned favor of the Master.
Your standing before God is not measured by the duration of your sweat or the perfection of your track record.
And realizing that destroys the root of human envy, too.
It does. The early workers in the parable grumbled and complained because they were constantly comparing their labor to the latecomers.
Keeping a horizontal ledger.
But when you truly realize that you yourself are an 11th hour worker who has received a massive reward you didn't earn, you feel a holy joy in the master's generosity toward others.
You stop keeping score.
You stop keeping score of what other believers are doing, what ministries they have, or what blessings they are receiving. You are just thrilled to be in the vineyard at all.
So let's bring this right down to the ground for you listening right now. If the master pays out of sheer grace rather than merit, think about what that means for how you look at the undeserving people in your own life tomorrow.
It's a challenging thought.
If your personal ledger with God has been completely torn up and paid off by Christ, do you really have the right to keep a rigid, unforgiving ledger on your spouse?
Wow.
Do you have the right to demand a strict return on investment from that annoying coworker, or to keep a meticulous tally of the mistakes your kids make?
We do that so often.
We do. If God has burned the contract of works and deals with you entirely in grace, consider what it would look like to walk into your relationships tomorrow and burn the ledgers you are holding over everyone else.
The sun is setting on this age, but the master is still calling the idol. Abandon the exhausting ledger of your own works, drop the scorecards you keep on others, and cast yourself entirely upon the mercy of the one who justifies the ungodly.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Rest securely in the unearned favor of the Master. Until next time.